Welcome to the Hawkridge Systems Webinar Wednesday e-learning event for SOLIDWORKS Composer. Today we're going to be going over creating high fidelity animations, and this is a fun topic for me. So I really like animations, so any of you that have met me probably knows that already. And oh, by the way, my name is Scott Woods. I'm the product manager for SOLIDWORKS Composer, and today's going to be kind of fun, and going to be playing with the assembly selection mode versus part selection mode, and when to make animations in the view mode and when to make animations in the actual animation timeline. So animations can be difficult. If anybody has tried to animate in past programs, there's many animation programs out there. They all have their kind of quirks, and I guess, you just have to, kind of like an old car, you have to learn how they function and learn where they're going to mess up to actually start developing animations. In Composer, there's a lot of tools that helps you get over those hurdles, and that's what I'm going to show today. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into Composer here. And as you can see, we got the contribution aircraft carrier. And apologize, I noticed right before the webinar, right before I went to start, I think I deleted the fuselage of a couple of these planes somehow. So we're missing some planes, and it's a helicopter here, and I have no idea how that happened. It was not like that, and all of a sudden it was, and of course 2 minutes before the webinar, it's too late to fix it. So you just have to pretend like those planes are there. Well, anyways, to get started here, in Composer, what I have here is I have a SOLIDWORKS model that I've imported and basically added some water to the scene. All of these planes, this aircraft carrier, is all one SOLIDWORKS top-level assembly, which makes it nice. And if you watched my previous webinars, you'll notice that the assembly is under the root. And so when you do a file open into Composer, instead of doing a direct open, if you say merge into the current document or merge into a new document, it'll put that under the root. And merging anything to the current document, we can actually use Composer as an assembly structure, so all of those assemblies aren't located in a single assembly in SOLIDWORKS. If they are a single assembly in SOLIDWORKS, it makes life a little bit easier. You just import it once and you're done. If it's not, you have to import it once and then merge into current document and add to it, and then you get the same outcome at the end. But this guy was, so it's nice. Also, another thing to point out, and let me go ahead and toggle on the assembly selection mode right here. So this assembly selection mode, this is your friend when it comes to animation. And it is, I'm going to say, impossible to do a lot of these advanced techniques without the assembly selection mode, especially in animation. And as I go through this, I'll try to emphasize that to really explain why that is. And so I think the best way to do that is just to show it. So I have assembly selection mode turned on. Now if I click on this Osprey here, you'll see that it selects it in blue. It also selects the Osprey sub-assembly inside this top-level assembly, the entire assembly. If I open that up, you'll see that all the parts within here, any sub-assemblies within there, are not selected. So this is like, if you could imagine in SOLIDWORKS, we have a sub-assembly, that sub-assembly is inside another assembly, that assembly is inside a top-level assembly. So when you want to move that assembly in the top-level assembly, you would edit, or you wouldn't even edit the sub-assembly, you would just select it, move it around. Since all the parts are located in that subassembly, they're going to move with that subassembly. Now, in SOLIDWORKS, if you were to edit that subassembly, edit in context, select the parts and move them or create an exploded view, you're not necessarily moving that subassembly in the top-level assembly. You're moving those parts around inside that subassembly. Now, Composer works identically to that. So if you can get that concept, then the assembly selection mode starts making sense. So with that selected, let me go ahead and just double click that guy so we can zoom in here. Since I had the sub-assembly selected, or I'm sorry, the selection mode is selected, had this assembly selected, I could zoom to fit just by double clicking it. If I had if I did not have assembly mode selected, you'll see that it selects all the parts. And if I were to double click a part, it's going to zoom into that single component. With the sub-assembly selected, I can just double click it and I get the entire assembly because the assembly is zooming to fit and not the part. Alright, so let's go ahead and create our first, frame in the animation. So something like that. So I'm just zooming into this guy, positioning it, rotating the camera a little bit, and then I'm going to make a new view just by going to views and saying new view. Now there's certain elements in Composer that you want to do in your views, and there's certain elements that you want to do in the animation. And keep in mind, this is when you're creating an animation. If you're creating a step-by-step, like printable assembly instructions or something that's going to be interactive, that's just this procedural step-by-step, animation's typically not even necessary. The only time animation is really necessary is when you want to go from point A to point B in a non-linear fashion. So in a view, if you take an object from point A to point B, it's going to translate it along a linear path from those 2 points. If you want to rotate something, you can't rotate something 360 degrees because it wouldn't even move. Because view A would say it's located here, view B would say it's also located here, so then nothing happens. So if you wanted to spin that in 360 degrees or more, then you have to do that in the animation. And that's what we'll be doing here. We'll actually be spinning these propellers, we'll have the airplane take off and animate that on the fly here. So in the view for linear movements, I know that I can't spin these propellers, so I'll do that in the animation. I could move the plane, but that's such an easy movement. I'm going to go ahead and do that in the animation as well. I could do that in the views or the animation, doesn't really matter. For this purpose, I'm going to go ahead and do that in the animation. But one key element here that I can do in the views that's really going to help me out and save time when I get to the animation stage is actually to translate or transition these two propellers horizontal so we can actually take off. Right? So it's kind of like a Harrier sort of plane here. It's actually a pretty cool plane. But so to do that, you'll see in the sub-assembly of the Osprey, I have a bunch of parts here, and I have some sub-assemblies. Inside those sub-assemblies is another sub-assembly that breaks that down. So when you model in SOLIDWORKS, this assembly structure you can utilize in Composer. And the better that assembly structure, the easier life is going to be in Composer. If you have, so say that there's this carrier assembly. Say that I had the entire carrier, all these airplanes and everything, just as parts under a single top-level assembly. It would be very difficult to animate that in Composer because if I were to, wanted to spin this propeller and I click on it, there wouldn't be a sub-assembly for it. It would just be a bunch of parts. I'd have to select, have to find, locate, and select all those components and then rotate them together, and it would just make life difficult. So that assembly structure in SOLIDWORKS is crucial when you get to Composer for ease of use. So here I have for instance, a sub-assembly of this unit here. I have another one here of that unit there. Under that unit, I have the propeller. Under this one, I have the propeller. Now that makes things really easy because now in the views, I can take this unit, rotate it, and then in the assembly, or in the animation, rotate the propeller separately using the assembly selection mode, which again is under assembly, and I have it selected right there. It's really easy to tell when you have it selected compared to not having it selected because your parts are blue when it is selected and they are orange or outlined like this when it's not selected. So, okay, let's go ahead and transition one of these down. So I'm going to go ahead and take the right one. There we go. And I want to rotate this into a horizontal position. Now if I go to transform and rotate, I get this rotational axis here, and if I hold down Alt, you'll see that these axes will actually light up to let me know what exactly I'm about to rotate. So if I click here and I try to rotate it, I'm going to get something like this, right? It's rotating along the wrong axis. So what's happening is just taking the center of mass and it's rotating around that. So I'm going to undo that, and I want to zoom in here. So I'm going to zoom in here, and there is a bar, right? So the cylindrical bar, and I want to select the edge of that for rotation. So if I hit Tab, I can hide components. So if I mouse over something, just hit Tab, I can make them disappear. And if I hold down Alt, I can then select that edge now that the wing is no longer visible. I click on that, and now I can start rotating this guy along that axis, just like that. Alright, so without clicking anything, I'm going to go to my views, and I'm going to reactivate this view 1 that I just made. Because I had zoomed in, so now I want to zoom back out. I want that wing to come back. But that selection I made is still going to retain. And that's one of the beauties of things, or I guess one of my favorite things of Composer is that your selections retain even when you change your view. So this whole subassembly is still selected, and my angle, or the axes for the angle is still selected there. So I don't know exactly what angle to make this at. I think it's about 60 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and say, oh, sorry, one more thing I want to point out here. When I rotate this, you'll see in the left under properties, it says negative 16.9 degrees. And if I move it the other way, you'll see it goes in the positive direction. So if you're unsure when you rotate something, if you should type in negative 45 degrees or positive 45 degrees, just move it in the direction you want it to go, and it will tell you what degrees that is. Typically it's usually, obvious, but if you have a question, then that's an easy way to tell. So I need to go negative 60 degrees, so I'm going to say negative 60 in the properties here, and I'm going to hit enter. And then that's going to plop it into that degrees. Now with the other subassembly, I'm going to select it, and I could do the exact same thing, right? Hide the wing, select that edge, rotate it down, but there's this tool in Composer called copy location and also copy transformation. So location would take this propeller and move it exactly where the other propeller location is in space, which we don't want in this case. But the copy transformation will say whatever that one did, the one I just moved, apply that same movement to this one. And even though the axis is in a different direction or different location, it shouldn't matter. I'm going to go and test this. I didn't, theoretically this should work, and if it doesn't, I'll show you guys how to fix it. But if we go copy transformation and click on this subassembly, and I want to make sure I actually get the subassembly, so I'm going to select it in the tree here, that guy right there. There we go, it worked. So I've selected that, and it copied those movements just like that. And it copied that axis location. Now if that didn't work, for whatever reason, there's a couple of reasons why that wouldn't work, and that's if the assembly structure between the two weren't identical. So I wouldn't really know how to do it. If they're not identical, they're not mirrors of each other, in this case they are, you would simply zoom in, tab that wing gone, alt select that edge, and then tell it to rotate negative 60 degrees, and you would have the same outcome. Okay. So now that those are down, I'm going to go ahead and create another view just by hitting this button right here for create new view, and now I have the two. If I toggle between the two, you'll see these movements. Double. So we got A and we got B. And because that rotation's less than 179 degrees, or I'd say 179 degrees and less, it rotates in the correct location or correct direction, and I only need two views to do that. Okay, so now that I have kind of my views started, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the animation timeline to kind of wrap this up. Okay, so up here in the top left corner of the viewport, we have view mode. If I click on that, it's going to toggle from view to animation. You'll see that I have animation selected. Now, if I take any of these views and I drag and drop them into the timeline, it's going to take and copy that view. If you're ever dragging views into the timeline, you have elements such as in kind of environmental elements, or let's say collaboration actors such as like notes or annotations or arrows or something like that, and they don't come into the animation. The reason why that is because they're just toggled off. So if you're dragging a view into the animation timeline and it looks like it's missing things, just go to the collaboration tab, and let's say it's annotations, you just would check annotations, or you would check panels or whatever it is that's missing here, and basically it's an on and off in the animation mode. And these are global for the animation. So in the animation, things are either off or they're on. If you want something to disappear, you have to set the opacity down. If you uncheck it, it unchecks it for the entire animation. You have to keep that in mind because the views is different. Per view you can have things checked or unchecked. In the animation you have to have the opacity controlling that. And so if it's unchecked in the animation as far as your annotations, then your annotations won't show up in the whole animation. So you want to make sure your annotations are on, but the opacity is controlling when they pop in and when they disappear and stuff like that. Okay, just a little tip there. Another tip is in my views, if I go back to my view mode here, you'll see that in my environment, I have my format. It says user defined, but it's actually the 16 by 9 right here. So I have my format set to 16 by 9 in my views. That way when I take it to the animation, it takes that format aspect ratio as 16 by 9, and that's the same aspect ratio for high definition video. So when I output this and create a video from it, my aspect ratio is already set for high definition. Third tip here, just so I cover all the bases, is the ocean, right? The water, the reflection and all that. So what's going on there is in my collaboration tab I have what's referred to as the ground. It's under environment, ground. So I have the ground turned on. You just click it here, turns it on. It's also Control-G will toggle that off and on. And if you see ground texture, I downloaded an image from Google Images. It's this little JPEG right here. I just use that as the texture for the ground. So ground can be water or ground, you know. In this case, it's water. And then I toggled on the mirror effect here to get the boat or the ship to reflect in the water. Okay, so let me jump back to animation. Go back to my views, and you'll see my water is turned off in the animation. It's just because, let me just check it, uncheck it. I'm not really sure why that is, but let's drag it back in. It should pop right back. There we go. Okay, so I always say this is something I always suggest, is when you're dealing with animations and you're dragging views from your view pane to your animation timeline, drag them in at least twice in a row. That creates these nice stops. If you're just dragging them in one after another, the animation is going to be moving all over the place, and it's going to be confusing to the viewer of what exactly is going on. It gives you less control over what's happening as well. So I dragged that in at 0 seconds. Let's go ahead and drag it in to get it, I don't know, 1.5, 2 seconds, and in that range there. Now I have an animation that does nothing, right? It just kind of sits there, and kind of a little starter. You play a video, it doesn't really do anything for a couple seconds, and then goes into the fun stuff here. Now the second one, I'm going to take this and drag it in, I don't know, maybe at 4 seconds. That way there's a nice smooth transition. You'll see that for 2 seconds it doesn't do anything. For another 2 seconds it just kind of zooms into this guy here. Alright, now I'm going to drag it in again, maybe 1 second in, and you'll see now that it zooms in, and then it just stays stationary for about a second before anything happens. And then the third one, I'll drag that in, I don't know, maybe another, I don't know, just a couple seconds down. That way it kind of has a little bit of a dramatic effect of these guys kind of locking into position, something like that. Okay, so now, so far, all the animation we've done is using the views. And so we watch this animation, and so far we haven't really done anything in animation yet, but now we're going to. Alright, so this plane's going to, these propellers are going to start spinning, the camera's going to zoom out, this guy's going to take off down the runway and fly in the air. And so, utilizing the assembly selection mode, we can make that happen. If we don't use assembly selection mode, that's never going to happen, and it's going to be chaotic. If you're doing something like this, try it. You'll see what I mean, because if we just select the parts without selecting the subassemblies and start rotating them, it will look fine like this. As soon as the plane starts flying forward, those parts will stay where they're at, and the propellers will still be spinning here while the plane's in the air somewhere. And there'll be this disconnection between the parts, and it's be very difficult to ever get correct. So trust me, it's how I learned. And it was very frustrating until I figured out, hey, if I use assembly selection mode, I can get around this, and it's a nice little trick. Okay, so those guys just locked down into place. Now let's go in, I don't know, maybe a half a second or so. So they've just went down. Now they're going to start spinning. So before I do anything, I'm going to toggle my assembly tab, make sure that the assembly selection mode is still on. I'm going to select one of these propellers. as soon as I select it, it actually selects it in the tree, which is really nice. And see how it turned blue right there? So know that that's the subassembly that I currently have selected. And at this point here is when it's going to start spinning. So I need to create a starting location point before I start moving it. So I'm going to say, okay, go ahead and lock that down. So right here on the timeline it says set location keys. So that sets a location for where it's currently at. And if I click on this guy here, I'm going to go ahead and set location keys for that guy as well. And so now for these two, at this point, they're kind of locked into position. They're ready to do something. Now let's say from 7.5 seconds to 9.5 seconds, so 2 seconds later, these guys are about to approach maximum rotation, right? So, but from point A to point B, we kind of want this slow starting rotation, and then we're going to start spinning these fast. So let's go ahead and say that we want to rotate this. In animation, the cameras control the location of the camera. So we can zoom in, rotate, do whatever we want. We don't have to worry about screwing anything up, which is nice. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. And you'll see that my rotational axis right now is here, which is not a good thing. So I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard. I'm going to move over a circular edge, such as this guy here. It looks like my propellers need to spin counterclockwise. Am I right? Yes, let me think about that. Is it clockwise? Yeah, it is clockwise, isn't it? Okay, so I'm sorry about that. I was just thinking the angle of the propeller, which way is the air going to flow, so it's clockwise. Yes, okay, just sorry about that. I had to think about it. Okay, so you'll see that as in a clockwise rotation, it is negative, a negative number. So I want this to spin, let's say, twice over the next 2 seconds, just kind of the slow start. So I'm going to say negative 720 degrees, typing it over there in the properties. Hit enter. As soon as I hit enter, look down at the timeline right now. So I hit enter, it's going to automatically create those keys, which is super handy because if Composer didn't do that, every 179 degrees you'd have to rotate it and then say, okay, that's at 0.825 seconds, and then another 0.825 seconds, rotate another 179 degrees. So it rotates in the right direction. So Composer does all that math for you, which is super nice. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next one, and we're going to say that now this one has to spin counterclockwise because the blades are angled separate or differently, which makes sense, right? Because it's the same propeller but mirrored. Okay, so if I go Alt and I select that edge, now this one I'm going to go. And it's funny, it says negative as well, but that's because they're, it's just trying to calculate that origin there. So, which is fine. So we'll say, okay, this one's also negative 720, and it's going to spin counterclockwise. All right, so now, let me verify that. Okay, so now they come down, lock into position, and now they're going to start spinning. These two propellers are going to start spinning toward each other. The one on the left is clockwise, the one on the right is counterclockwise. And let me just play that animation. It's going to do something like that. You'll see they're spinning, but it's not going to create any kind of lift, right? So let's zoom out in the timeline. We'll go to I don't know, let's do 34 seconds here. And at this time, I want to now develop from this point here to this point there the rotations for these two propellers. Before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and save my file, just because it's always a good idea to do that. Something like that. Just in case something bad happens, we can come back to this location. Okay, so now I'm going to select this propeller. It's going to be counterclockwise. I'm going to hold down. Actually, I don't even have to hold down Alt because I get my rotation here and I have my axis already predefined. Holding down Alt, however, does help select those rings, which is nice. All right, so counterclockwise. So let's say negative. Oops, that's a big number there. Negative. Hold on a second, I'm not really sure. There we go. Negative 1500 degrees. 15,000. Yes, 15,000. Enter, and you'll see down the timeline it's developing all of those keys. And if you look at the viewport, it's kind of twitching. Oh, hold on one second. There it goes. So it just made enough keys to do 15,000 rotations. That would take all day to do in your views, maybe even more. So using the animation for rotations like this is just, it's self-explanatory why you would never want to do that in a view. Okay, so next one, hold down Alt, select that ring, and this one is also going to be negative 15,000 degrees. Enter. We'll let it develop those as well. Kind of halfway through, kind of locks up why it does it without displaying what it's doing, which is nice. It probably makes things a little bit faster, so the graphics card doesn't have to work that out while it's developing. Okay, let me go ahead and save that, and let's just play this animation real quick just to make sure everything is working the way we want it to so far. So the camera should zoom in, these guys should come down, lock into position, the propeller should start spinning, and then they should start spinning faster. Good enough. Probably could have got away with about 20,000 rotations to get those really spinning, but I think it gets the point across. Okay, let's go ahead and stop that. And now we want this guy to start taking off, right? So at any given time during this, I can start moving the camera. And let's go ahead and say that the camera is going to start moving about here. So I'm going to, before I move the camera, I have to lock it down. So I just stop the time. I'm going to take the camera, I'm going to toggle it on, and that creates a camera key right there. And then let's go and scrub this just a couple seconds forward. And if I double click the carrier, it will zoom out to that. It will also change perspective to match that part there. And let's do something like that, something a little dramatic here, and then we'll create another camera key. So then when we rewind this back, we'll see that the camera is going to stay stationary, and the camera is going to kind of zoom out to about right here, and then stop and wait for these guys to. I don't really like that. I don't like that perspective. Let me go ahead and change that. Actually, let's use this guy's perspective. By double-clicking components, you can see is going to change perspective to match that. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. You can get some kind of dramatic angles going on. That's another little trick. I don't know if anybody has realized that, but if you have assembly selection mode or even part selection mode and you double click a smaller part in a larger assembly, it will drastically change the perspective of the camera angle. And in animation that makes things pretty cool looking, such like this, where we can really get that drastic angle going on. And go and create another camera key. Okay, so now we have that. We zoom out here, and about right here I want that plane to start moving. And so this is where the trick of the assembly selection mode really comes into play in assembly. So I have that on, I select the airplane. Now even though these are spinning, they're spinning in context of their sub-assembly components. So I take that entire top level assembly of the plane and I can move it, and everything will still animate the way that we want it to. So we'll say at this point here we're going to lock it down. This is the plane is not going to move up until this point, and then right about here let's go ahead and translate it, holding down Alt, select the red, and I'm going to move it like here maybe, and then let's go ahead and say that at 34 seconds it's now going to be in the air. Let's make it a little bit higher than that. We'll make it in the air, and then maybe like way down here. You can see the ocean moving right now. That's the ground automatically adjusting, and that's an option. We can toggle the ground off. There's an automatic adjustment there we can toggle off. It's kind of cool though. I like it because it almost gives the illusion that the ocean is flowing or so, or this guy's. I guess the boat's moving in reverse. I don't know, but it's kind of a cool effect sometimes. Okay, so that's going to take off and something like that. And so at this point here, we want to start moving the camera. So let's go ahead and create a camera key. And let's, at this point here, we'll rotate the camera around. Let's go ahead and double click this guy so we can kind of zoom in on it. We'll create another camera key here, and then at the end, I want an organic feel. I could set the camera. I want to show you guys this. If you go to attach camera, you can fly with mode, and so if I wanted to have this camera fly with the plane, I could do that. However, I'd want two cameras in this animation. I'd want one camera stationary while the plane is flying, and then I would want another camera attached to it because it is a global adjustment, so the camera is always attached to the plane. In the actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and finish what I'm doing here, which is basically zooming in to this guy. Let me zoom in on him. I just want to create another camera before I show this little trick here. Alright, so create a camera. Okay, so in the timeline, if you have multiple cameras, and that's just by sitting here and say add a camera, in the timeline, under the environmental properties, there's a camera property here, and if you have multiple cameras, you can choose what camera to view at any given time. So if I had 15 cameras, I could say at 10 seconds switch to camera 3, at 12 seconds switch to camera 1, at 15 seconds switch to camera 14 or whatever, and I can have Composer automatically switch these cameras throughout the animation, which is really handy. All right, so let's go ahead and rewind it, and let's watch this animation one last time before we render it out. Now, when I render this out, there is multiple ways of creating video from the animation. I have a specific way that I like to do it. It gets the best outcome, and I'll go ahead and show that because I think that everybody will kind of get the best out of it. There we go. This guy's kind of flying off into the distance, and the camera, of course, is going to zoom back in on him and end at that point. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and rewind it. And the whole multiple cameras trick, we have a blog on that, and soon to be we'll have a YouTube video explaining that as well. So it's a kind of a timely process, so we'll keep it out of this webinar, and we'll show it in a free YouTube video on our Hawk Ridge YouTube channel. Okay, so now we want to save this out. We've got 3 ways to save out an animation. The easiest way, you go to File, Save As, Package. And I'm sure you guys have seen this. You save it as an exe. Now, exe is a self-executable player file that you can send to anybody with a PC. They don't have to have anything installed in order to view it. And basically, they can just see everything you made in Composer. They can watch the animation. But not only can they watch the animation, but they can also interact with it. So if I jump to where I just saved that, this exe right here, we'll go and open it up. And if I go up to play for the animation, you'll see that it will play the animation exactly how we did in Composer, but I can rotate and I can look at different angles and do whatever I want while it's actually playing. So something like that, which is a really cool way to deliver this animation. So that's option 1. And it's simple. You just do a save as exe and you're done. The second way is to save out a video. This is my least favorite out of the 3, but I do have to show it because it is part of the application here. And this will improve this codec capability, but as of right now we have the option for very limited codecs and AVI. But really, in my opinion, for animating, you really shouldn't animate out of video if you're doing a high definition video anyways. If something for the web is fine, but really you should be using a post-processing application such as like Adobe Premiere or even Microsoft Movie Maker to compile multiple videos together, add sound effects, add bumpers, add your logos, all that stuff, and then you create this very professional looking video. And that'll be option 3 that I'll show here in a minute. But option 2 is you say video. You can adjust your the size of the video if you want here. You say save video as, and save it here, AVI. It's the only current option. There is a free program called Handbrake. It's a freeware software that will convert an AVI to basically any other format out there, so you can have this end result be anything you want. Let's go ahead and save it, and then for the codecs, full frames uncompressed will give you the best quality video. It's very, very, very large file size, so make sure you have the hard drive space capable. This 34-second animation here would probably be 2-3 gigs, something like that. The Microsoft Video 1 is the second best option here. And let's save that. Hopefully that doesn't take too long here. I might cancel it after a couple seconds because you can see the progress right here. And I don't want everybody to have to wait all the way through. So we'll just cancel it at that point there. We should get a preview of what we started making. So here's the video of what was going to happen. And it's good quality. But this is my opinion, like website quality. Now, what I like to do, and this is how I render out all my animations, is I go to the high resolution workshop here. Let's go ahead and say no alpha channel, high resolution, 1280. Sure, that's high definition, 300 DPI. Turn the quality all the way up here, and then do multiple animations. Images per second is going to be 30. That's industry standard. We'll do the entire animation, save as, and then I'll create a folder, and I'll usually call it sequence or something like that for the image sequence, and then hit save. Now what that's going to do, and it's going to be about as long as creating that uncompressed or that AVI video. It's really doing the same thing in the background here. But if I go to the folder, we'll see the images that it's creating. So it's actually creating these JPEG images, and let's let it hit that 2-second mark so we can actually see some movement here. But what I'll do is I'll take the sequence of images, bring it into a video editing program, dump them all in there, put them all in sequence, add whatever you want, sound effects, stuff like that, and you get this real crisp, real nice high definition video output. And that's kind of the trick. If you've ever seen any of the real marketing animations that I've made, I'll typically use this process here. That's just after 2 seconds, so we should see some movement. There we go. It's starting to zoom in now. So it's just creating the frames of the animation is what it's doing at this point. Okay, so let me go ahead and stop that, because it's going to take a little while to respond. Okay, we'll just let that do its thing. Alrighty, so let's wrap this up. So here is, let's do something like this. So here's all of our contact information, and of course about Hawk Ridge Systems, and so yeah, the kind of the gist of today's presentation was those real video-esque animations, and how to make things look really cool. If you're going to take your product and put it, in like a real life situation, how it's going to react. But really, the key element between all that is when to make your animations in your views. That's going to be for linear movements, any rotations that are under 179 degrees in either direction, and anything that's really doesn't require a lot of rotation. You would do in your views, and then drag those into the timeline, and then anything that's going to be rotating and stuff, do all that movement in the timeline, rotate your cameras around. If you're going to make an animation, you don't have to worry about the camera angle in the views as well, because you can control that camera any angle you want in the animation, so it becomes a little bit irrelevant at that point. And keep in mind that assembly selection mode is key to selecting those sub-assemblies, selecting those sub-assemblies under those sub-assemblies, and rotating them and moving them in context of the top level assembly. So when you move that top level assembly in the animation, those components move with it and are still doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's kind of the gist of this presentation here. So thank you for attending. My email address, please only one .com. I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but It's Scott W at hawkridgesys.com, and go ahead and email me any questions you want. If you have any suggestions for future webinars or even YouTube videos or anything like that, let me know, because we'll definitely take that in and develop content for it and distribute that to you guys for free, of course.